The scream tore through the howling wind like a blade, and Eliza Bennett knew with absolute certainty that her time had come in the worst possible moment, trapped alone in a mountain cabin while a blizzard raged outside with the fury of 10,000 demons. Her late husband Thomas had been dead for 3 months, buried in the cold Montana earth after a logging accident, and now she faced bringing their child into the world without him, without anyone, as snow piled against the windows and the temperature plummeted to depths that could kill a person in minutes. She gripped the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles white as another contraction seized her body, squeezing with relentless force. The pain radiated from deep within her belly, spreading through her back and legs until she could barely stand. Eliza was 22 years old, hardly more than a girl herself, but widowhood and pregnancy had aged her in ways that went beyond the physical. Her auburn hair, usually pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, hung loose and damp with sweat despite the freezing air that crept through every crack in the cabin walls. "Please," she whispered to no one, to God, to Thomas's memory. "Please, I cannot do this alone." The cabin was small, just 2 rooms that Thomas had built with his own hands when they arrived in Montana Territory in the spring of 1882. They had come west from Pennsylvania with dreams of logging fortune, of building something substantial in this wild and beautiful land. Those dreams lay buried with Thomas now, and Eliza had spent the past 3 months trying to figure out how she would survive the winter, how she would raise a child alone in this unforgiving wilderness. She had supplies enough flour and salted meat to last until spring if she was careful, but she had not anticipated the baby coming early, and she certainly had not anticipated this storm. The blizzard had started 2 days ago as innocent flurries, pretty snowflakes drifting down from a gray sky. By evening, the wind had picked up, and by midnight, it was a full-fledged monster. Eliza had never seen snow like this in Pennsylvania. The drifts outside her windows were taller than a man, and the wind shrieked like tortured souls. She could not see more than a few feet beyond her door, just a wall of white that seemed to erase the world. Another contraction hit, and this time Eliza cried out, unable to contain the sound. Her water had broken an hour ago, soaking through her dress and pooling on the floor. She knew enough about childbirth to understand that the baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Her mother had died when Eliza was 15, but not before teaching her daughter the basics of women's work, cooking, sewing, and yes, delivering babies. Eliza had even assisted at a birth once, though standing beside the midwife was vastly different from being the one in labor. She had prepared as best she could. Clean linen sat folded on the bed, water boiled on the stove, a knife lay ready to cut the cord, and thread waited to tie it off. But her hands shook as she tried to breathe through the pain, and fear clawed at her throat. Women died in childbirth all the time, even with help. Alone, in a blizzard, with no one to know if something went wrong, the odds were not in her favor. Eliza made her way to the bed, moving slowly between contractions. She had changed into her oldest nightgown, the fabric soft from years of washing. The fire in the stove crackled, providing some warmth, but she still shivered. Outside, the wind howled louder, and she heard something crash a tree branch, perhaps, or part of the shed roof. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, placing both hands on her swollen belly. "We will get through this together. Your papa would want us to be strong." But as another wave of pain crashed over her, Eliza felt her resolve wavering. She was so tired already, and the labor had only just begun. How many hours would this take? How much more could her body endure? She thought of Thomas, of his kind smile and gentle hands, of the way he used to rest his palm on her belly and talk to their unborn child about the future they would have together. He had been so excited to be a father. It broke her heart that he would never meet this baby, never hold his son or daughter, never see those first steps or hear that first word. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat. She was crying and did not care, great heaving sobs that shook her shoulders. It was not fair. None of this was fair. Thomas should be here. She should not be alone. That was when she heard a sound beneath the wind, a thudding that seemed to come from the cabin door. At first, Eliza thought she had imagined it, but then it came again, more insistent. Someone was knocking, hope and fear tangled in her chest. Who could possibly be out in this storm? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and no one in their right mind would travel in these conditions. But the knocking continued, and then a voice, deep and rough, called out, "Anyone inside? I need shelter." Eliza tried to stand, but another contraction pinned her to the bed. She gasped, unable to answer, pain radiating through every nerve. The voice called again, more urgent this time. "Please, I will freeze to death out here." Summoning every ounce of strength, Eliza forced herself upright. She staggered to the door, one hand braced against the wall, the other clutching her belly. When she lifted the latch and pulled, the door flew inward with the force of the wind, and a figure stumbled inside in a blast of snow and freezing air. He was enormous, this stranger, built like a grizzly bear with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and arms thick with muscle beneath his snow-crusted coat. He wore furs, wolf and deer, and something else Eliza could not identify, and his face was half hidden behind a thick beard covered in ice. Long, dark hair hung past his shoulders, matted with snow. He carried a rifle on his back and a pack that looked like it weighed as much as Eliza herself. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and Eliza saw his eyes widen as he took in her condition, the swollen belly, the nightgown, the obvious distress on her face. Then another contraction hit, and she doubled over with a cry that left no doubt about what was happening. The stranger moved fast for such a large man. He kicked the door shut behind him, shutting out the howling wind, and dropped his pack. In 3 strides, he crossed the small cabin and caught Eliza before she could fall. "Easy now," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite its roughness. "I have got you." His hands were large and strong, steadying her with a confidence that cut through her panic. He helped her back to the bed, supporting most of her weight as if she weighed nothing at all. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds, and despite the wild appearance, there was intelligence and kindness in his gaze. "You are in labor," he stated, not a question. Eliza nodded, unable to speak as the contraction continued its assault. She gripped his forearm without thinking, needing something solid to hold on to, and she felt the rock-hard muscle beneath the wet fabric of his coat. "How long?" he asked. "An hour," she managed. "Maybe 2. The pains started this morning, but they were not close together until recently." He nodded, processing this information with a calmness that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "Are you alone here?" "My husband is dead," Eliza said, and saying it aloud to this stranger made it feel real all over again. 3 months ago. Something flickered in those gray-blue eyes, sympathy, understanding, something deeper. "I'm sorry for your loss. My name is Jacob Thorne. I live up in the high country, but I was checking my trap lines when the storm hit. I've been walking for 2 days trying to find shelter." "Eliza Bennett," she whispered. "This is my cabin. Was. Thomas built it." Another contraction was building. She could feel it gathering like a wave. Jacob seemed to sense it too. He shrugged out of his heavy coat, revealing a thick wool shirt that stretched across a chest like a barrel. His arms were corded with muscle, the physique of a man who lived by physical labor and survival in the wilderness. He moved to the stove, checking the water, surveying the supplies she had laid out. "You have prepared well," he said. "That is good, but you cannot do this alone." "I had no choice," Eliza said through gritted teeth as the contraction peaked. Jacob returned to her side, and without asking permission, he pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "You have a choice now. I am here, and I am not going anywhere until that baby is born safe and you are both well. Do you understand me?" The conviction in his voice was absolute, and Eliza felt something inside her ease just slightly. She was not alone anymore. This strange mountain man, this Jacob Thorne, was here, and somehow she believed he would keep his word. "Have you ever delivered a baby?" she asked, needing to know. "Twice," he said, "both times for women whose husbands were out hunting. One was a trapper's wife, the other a Crow woman who saved my life once. I am no midwife, but I know enough. Babies come whether we are ready or not, and nature does most of the work. We just need to help where we can." Eliza wanted to ask more about those other births, about how a Crow woman had saved his life, about everything, but the contractions were coming faster now, with less time to rest between them. The pain was intense, consuming, and she found herself gripping Jacob's hand without remembering when he had offered it. His palm was rough with calluses, but warm and steady. "That's it," he said quietly. "Breathe through it." You are doing fine." Time became strange after that. Minutes blended into hours, marked only by waves of pain and Jacob's steady presence. He moved around the cabin with surprising grace for such a large man, stoking the fire, bringing fresh water, checking on her between contractions. When she needed to walk, he supported her. When she needed to lean on something, he was there, solid as a mountain. He spoke to her in that low, calm voice, telling her stories about the high country to distract her about elk herds and frozen waterfalls, about northern lights that danced green and purple across the winter sky, about a wolf pack he had befriended that sometimes followed him on his trap lines. "You live alone up there?" Eliza asked during a brief respite, her voice hoarse. "Mostly," Jacob said. He was wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I have a cabin higher up, bigger than this one. Been there for 8 years now, since I left civilization behind." "Why did you leave?" A shadow crossed his face. "That is a story for another time. Right now, you need to focus on this little one." As if in response, Eliza felt a change in the contractions, a new pressure that made her cry out. Jacob immediately moved to check, his expression focused and professional despite the intimate nature of the situation. Eliza was beyond modesty now, beyond caring about anything except getting this baby safely into the world. "The baby is coming," Jacob said, and there was excitement beneath the calm. "When the next contraction hits, you need to push. Can you do that?" Eliza nodded, fear and anticipation warring in her chest. This was it. After 9 months of carrying this child, after 3 months of grieving Thomas, after hours of labor, this was the moment everything changed. The contraction built like a crescendo, and Eliza pushed with everything she had. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, a tearing, burning sensation that made her scream. But Jacob was there, his voice cutting through the agony. "Good, that is good, Eliza. Again, when you are ready, you are so strong. Your baby is almost here." She pushed again and again, losing count of how many times. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. Her nightgown was soaked, her hair plastered to her head. She was dimly aware of Jacob's hands, confident and sure, guiding the baby. The storm still raged outside, wind shrieking and snow piling ever higher, but inside the cabin there was only this moment, this struggle, this life trying to enter the world. "One more," Jacob said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "One more big push, Eliza. You can do this." She bore down with the last reserves of her strength, feeling something give way, and suddenly the pressure released. A thin, reedy cry filled the cabin, the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard. She fell back against the pillows, gasping, tears streaming down her face. "A boy," Jacob said, his voice rough with wonder. "You have a son." Through blurred vision, Eliza watched as Jacob worked quickly, clearing the baby's mouth and nose, tying off and cutting the cord with practiced efficiency. He wrapped the infant in clean linen, and then, with infinite care, he placed the tiny bundle in Eliza's arms. The baby was red and wrinkled, his face scrunched up as he wailed his protest at being thrust into this cold world. But he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that reminded Eliza so much of Thomas that her heart ached. She held her son close, feeling the warmth of him, the weight, the reality. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama. Your papa would have loved you so much." Jacob stepped back, giving them space, but Eliza looked up and saw the expression on his face, something tender and fierce and protective all at once. He had just helped bring her child into the world during a blizzard in a remote mountain cabin. He was covered in blood and sweat, his hair wild, his face exhausted, but he had never looked more magnificent. "Thank you," Eliza said, the words inadequate for what she felt. "Jacob, thank you. We would have died without you." He shook his head slowly. "You are stronger than you know, Eliza Bennett. You would have found a way. But I am glad I was here to help." The afterbirth came shortly after, and Jacob handled that too with the same calm efficiency. He cleaned up while Eliza focused on her son, who had stopped crying and was now looking around with unfocused eyes, taking in his first moments of life. She tried to nurse him, and after some fumbling, he latched on, his tiny mouth working instinctively. Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, But inside, the cabin was warm and safe. Jacob had stoked the fire high, and he moved around quietly, changing the bedding, bringing Eliza fresh water to drink, making sure she was comfortable. He worked like a man used to caring for others, despite his claim of living alone in the mountains. "You should rest," he said after everything was settled. "You have been through an ordeal." "What about you?" Eliza asked. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders sagged slightly. "You walked through a blizzard for 2 days and then delivered a baby. You must be dead on your feet." Jacob smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. "I will be fine. I have slept in worse conditions than a warm cabin." "There is a chair by the fire," Eliza insisted. "At least sit down, please." He hesitated, then nodded. He dragged the chair closer to the stove and sank into it with a sigh that suggested he was indeed exhausted. Eliza watched him from the bed, her son cradled against her chest, and felt a strange contentment despite everything. Her body ached, her heart still grieved for Thomas, but in this moment she was aware of being alive, of her son being alive, of this unexpected guardian who had appeared out of the storm like some kind of miracle. "Jacob," she said quietly, "tell me about yourself. Where are you from originally?" He leaned back in the chair, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. "Illinois," he said. "Grew up on a farm outside Chicago, enlisted when the war broke out in 1861. I was 18, full of foolish ideas about glory and honor." Eliza did quick math in her head. That would make him around 43 now, though he looked younger despite the weathered quality of his skin. "You fought in the war." 4 years of it," Jacob said, his voice distant. "Saw things no man should see. Did things I am not proud of. When it ended, I could not go back to the farm, could not pretend to be the boy I had been. So I went west, worked as a scout for the army for a few years, then a hunter. Then I just kept going until I found a place where I could hear myself think again. That was 8 years ago." "And you have been alone ever since?" "Mostly. I go into town a few times a year for supplies, trade furs and meat, but yes, mostly alone. It suits me." Eliza heard the pain beneath his words, the unspoken trauma. "The war took something from you." Jacob's eyes met hers, and in them she saw depths of old suffering. "The war took something from everyone who lived through it. Some of us just could not find our way back." "I am sorry," Eliza said softly. "Eliza, do not be. I have made peace with my life. The mountains are clean, honest. Animals do not lie or betray or send you into battle for politicians' games. It is a good life in its way." They fell silent, listening to the storm and the crackling fire. The baby had fallen asleep at Eliza's breast, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She could not stop looking at him, marveling at his existence. "What will you name him?" Jacob asked. Eliza had thought about this for months, discussing it with Thomas before the accident. They had chosen names together, boy and girl, planning for every possibility. "Thomas," she said, "after his father, Thomas Jacob Bennett." Jacob's head came up sharply, surprise clear on his face. "You do not have to—" "I want to," Eliza interrupted. "You helped bring him into this world. You saved both our lives. It is a good name, and he should carry it." The mountain man looked at her for a long moment, something working in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "I am honored, truly." The hours that followed took on a dreamlike quality. The blizzard continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, a strange intimacy had formed between the widow and the mountain man. Jacob dozed in the chair by the fire, waking periodically to check on Eliza and the baby, to add wood to the stove, to make sure they were warm and safe. Eliza slept when she could, her body exhausted from the labor, but her mind kept circling back to the man who had stumbled into her life at exactly the right moment. There was something about Jacob Thorne that called to her, something beyond gratitude for what he had done. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was awake, studying the way the firelight played across his strong features, the way his large hands moved with unexpected gentleness when he checked on the baby. He was powerful and dangerous looking with his wild hair and scarred knuckles, but he had been nothing but kind and careful with her. On the second day after the birth, the blizzard finally began to ease. The wind died down from a shriek to a moan, and through the window, Eliza could see hints of gray sky beyond the white. She was sitting up in bed, feeling stronger despite the soreness, with Thomas Jacob sleeping in a makeshift cradle that Jacob had fashioned from a drawer and some blankets. "Storm is breaking," Jacob said from his position by the window. "Another day and I should be able to dig us out." "And then you will leave," Eliza said, and she was surprised by the disappointment in her own voice. Jacob turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I should get back to my cabin. Will you be all right here on your own?" "I managed before," Eliza said, trying to sound braver than she felt. The thought of being alone again, especially now with a newborn, filled her with dread. But what choice did she have? Jacob had his own life, his solitary existence in the high country. She could not expect him to stay. "That is not what I asked," Jacob said quietly. He crossed the cabin and sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the frame creak. "Will you be all right, Eliza? Truly?" She wanted to lie, to reassure him, but something in his eyes made her speak the truth. "I do not know. I have enough supplies to last the winter if I am careful. I know how to hunt and trap a little. Thomas taught me. But with the baby," her voice broke. "I'm frightened, Jacob. I'm so frightened of doing this alone." His hand covered hers, rough and warm. "What about family? Surely you have people who could help." "My parents are dead. Thomas's family disowned him when he married me. They thought he was marrying beneath his station." She laughed bitterly. "I was a seamstress's daughter, not good enough for their precious son. We came west to make a new start, away from all that, and we were happy, truly happy until the accident." "How did it happen?" Jacob asked gently. Eliza took a breath, steadying herself. She had not talked about it much, had tried to bury the memories. "A tree fell wrong during a logging operation. Thomas was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They brought him back to the cabin, but he was already gone. I buried him on the hill behind the cabin, where he liked to sit and watch the sunset." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Jacob reached up with his other hand to brush them away with his thumb. The gesture was so tender that it made her cry harder. He pulled her into his arms, carefully mindful of her healing body, and let her weep against his broad chest. She could feel the steady thump of his heart, the solid strength of him, and she let herself break down in a way she had not allowed since Thomas's death. When the tears finally subsided, Eliza pulled back embarrassed. "I am sorry. You do not need to deal with a weeping widow." "Grief deserves its space," Jacob said, still holding her hands. "You have lost your husband and gained a son in the space of 3 months. You are allowed to feel everything at once. But you must think I am weak." "I think you are the strongest woman I have ever met," Jacob said, and the conviction in his voice made her look up sharply. "You survived alone for 3 months while pregnant. You prepared to deliver your own baby because you had no choice. You pushed through hours of labor without giving up. Eliza, you are not weak. You are magnificent." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Eliza felt her breath catch, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hands wrapped around hers, of the intensity in his storm-gray eyes. Something had shifted in the cabin over the past 2 days, a connection forming that went beyond circumstance. "Jacob," she started, but he was already pulling back, standing up, putting distance between them. "You need to eat," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I will make something." He busied himself at the stove, and Eliza watched him, her heart racing. What was happening here? She had loved Thomas, still loved Thomas, but this mountain man had awakened something in her that she had not expected to feel again so soon. Was it just gratitude? The aftermath of shared trauma? Or something more? Jacob made a simple stew from the supplies in the cabin, adding some dried venison from his pack that gave it a rich, smoky flavor. They ate together in companionable silence, and afterward, Jacob insisted on cleaning up while Eliza nursed the baby. Little Thomas was eating well, strong and healthy despite his dramatic entrance into the world. "He looks like his father?" Jacob asked, watching from across the room. "He has Thomas's hair," Eliza said, "but I think his eyes might be mine. It is too early to tell. He is a lucky boy to have you as his mother. I hope I can be good enough for him. I hope I can give him the life Thomas wanted for him." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then he spoke carefully, as if weighing each word. "What if you did not have to do it alone?" Eliza's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her fully, and she could see he was struggling with something internal. "I have been thinking. This cabin is isolated, and you have a newborn. The winters here are harsh, and even with supplies it will be hard. You should not be alone." "Are you offering to stay?" Eliza asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm offering more than that," Jacob said. He crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, putting himself at her eye level. "I'm offering to help you through the winter, to teach you everything I know about surviving in this country, to hunt and trap and make sure you and the baby have everything you need." "Why would you do that?" Eliza whispered. Jacob's jaw tightened. "Because in 2 days I have come to care about what happens to you and that boy. Because I know what it is like to be alone, and I would not wish it on anyone. Because—" He stopped, seemed to gather courage. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, worth staying for, if you will have me." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza's mind raced. She had known this man for only 2 days, and yet he had seen her at her most vulnerable, had helped her through the most difficult experience of her life. There was something between them, something real. But was it enough? Could it be? "I cannot ask you to give up your life for us," Eliza said softly. "You are not asking. I am offering. And as for my life," Jacob smiled slightly, "it is a lonely one, Eliza. I thought I wanted solitude, but maybe what I really wanted was to find something worth coming down from the mountain for." "I still love Thomas," Eliza said, needing him to understand. "I will always love him." "I know," Jacob said, "and I would never ask you to forget him or replace him, but love is not a finite resource. The heart can hold more than one person, more than one feeling. I am not asking to take his place. I'm asking to stand beside you and help you build a future." Eliza looked down at her son, then back at Jacob. The practical part of her brain knew he was right. She needed help, needed someone who understood this harsh country. But there was more than practicality driving her answer. There was the way her heart lifted when he smiled, the way she felt safe in his presence, the way his gentleness contrasted with his rugged exterior in a manner that made her want to know everything about him. "Stay," she said finally. "Stay through the winter. Help me learn to survive here, and we will see what happens." Relief washed over Jacob's face. "You will not regret this. I swear to you, Eliza, I will do everything in my power to keep you and the baby safe." "I believe you," she said, and she did. The next day, the storm cleared enough for Jacob to dig out the cabin door. The world outside was transformed, buried under several feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. Jacob spent hours clearing a path to the woodshed, to the well, creating corridors through the white. He was tireless, his powerful body built for this kind of work, and Eliza watched from the window, marveling at his strength. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, she had hot coffee waiting. They sat together at the small table, and Jacob spread out his plan for the winter. He would move his essential supplies down from his cabin traps, tools, extra furs, and food. He would teach Eliza to set snares for rabbits, to ice fish in the nearby creek, to read animal tracks in the snow. He would hunt for larger game to supplement their stores, and he would help with the baby, taking the night shifts so Eliza could sleep. "You do not have to do that," Eliza protested when he mentioned the night shifts. "He is my son." "And you need to heal and rest," Jacob countered. "I do not need much sleep, and I am good at staying awake. Let me help, Eliza." So they fell into a routine. Jacob slept in the other room, the small storage area that Thomas had used for tools. It was cramped for a man his size, but he never complained. Each morning, he was up before dawn, stoking the fire, checking the cabin's defenses against the cold. He brought in wood, melted snow for water, and often had breakfast started before Eliza woke. During the days when the weather allowed, he went out to check trap lines he had set around the property. He taught Eliza to skin rabbits and tan hides, skills she had never learned in her Pennsylvania seamstress life. His hands guided hers, patient and sure, showing her how to work the knife, how to stretch the pelt. She was clumsy at first, but he never criticized, only encouraged. "You have good hands," he said one afternoon, watching her work. "Steady. You will be expert at this by spring." "If I do not cut myself first," Eliza muttered, but she was pleased by the compliment. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire. Jacob carved toys for the baby, simple things like rattles, and blocks his large hands working the wood with surprising delicacy. Eliza sewed, mending their clothes and making tiny garments for Thomas as he grew. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing their hopes for the future. Jacob told her about the war in bits and pieces, never lingering too long on the worst of it. She learned that he had been at Shiloh and Gettysburg, had seen friends die in his arms, had killed men whose faces still haunted his dreams. He spoke of the Crow woman who had saved him, how he had been caught in a blizzard much like the one that had brought him to Eliza's door, and how she had found him half frozen and nursed him back to health. In return, he had helped her when her husband was away, and she went into labor. Her name was Running Deer, Jacob said, staring into the fire. She taught me a lot about living in this country, about respecting the land and the animals. When she died 2 winters ago in a fever, I felt like I lost the only friend I had in the world. I'm sorry, Eliza said. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. She would have liked you. Eliza shared her own stories too, growing up in Philadelphia, learning her mother's trade, meeting Thomas at a church social. He had been apprenticed to a merchant, ambitious and kind, with dreams of heading west. They had courted for a year before marrying, and the marriage had been happy, if brief. He was a good man, Eliza said. He deserved better than to die so young. Life is not about what we deserve, Jacob said quietly. It is about what we do with what we are given. As the weeks passed, Eliza felt herself growing stronger, both physically and emotionally. Her body healed from the birth, and she regained her energy. Baby Thomas thrived, growing plump and alert, his eyes following movement around the cabin. And Jacob became indispensable. More than that, he became essential to her happiness in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She caught herself watching him when he did not notice, admiring the way his muscles flexed when he split wood, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over to check on the baby, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face. She found excuses to be near him, to touch his arm when they talked, to sit close by the fire in the evenings, and she was almost certain he felt the same way, though he was careful never to overstep, never to presume. It was torture and bliss all at once, this slow dance they were doing around each other. Eliza knew that grief and attraction could coexist, but she also felt guilty. Thomas had been dead for only 4 months. Was it too soon to feel this way about another man? What would people say? But then she would remember that there were no people here, no society to judge her. There was only the mountain, the snow, and Jacob's steady presence. And slowly she began to let herself feel without guilt, to accept that her heart was capable of opening again, even as it still grieved. The turning point came on a night in late January. A smaller storm had blown through, and Jacob had been outside securing the woodshed. When he came back in, his face was white with cold, his hands almost blue. Eliza immediately pulled him to the fire, rubbing his hands between hers to restore circulation. You should have come in sooner, she scolded. You could have gotten frostbite. The shed needed fixing, Jacob said through chattering teeth. Could not leave it half done. You stubborn man, Eliza said, but there was affection in her voice. She wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and brought him hot coffee laced with a bit of whiskey from Thomas's stores. You are no good to us if you freeze to death. Jacob's hands finally stopped shaking, color returning to his face. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Eliza felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. Us, he repeated softly. You said us. Did I? Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. Eliza. He set down the coffee and took her hands in his, now warm again. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Her heart pounded. All right. I know I have only been here for 6 weeks. I know you are still grieving your husband. I know you have every reason to send me away and tell me I am a fool, but I have to say this or I will burst. He took a deep breath. I am falling in love with you. Eliza's eyes widened, but Jacob pressed on. I do not know when it happened. Maybe it was when you answered the door while in labor and still had the strength to let a stranger inside. Maybe it was when you held your baby for the first time and I saw the fierce love in your eyes. Maybe it was any of 100 small moments since then. But it has happened, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore. Jacob. I am not asking you to love me back, he continued, his voice urgent. I'm not asking you to forget Thomas or to rush into anything. I am just telling you the truth because you deserve to know, and whatever you feel or do not feel, I will stay as long as you need me. That does not change. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not sad tears. Can I speak now? Jacob nodded, looking terrified of what she might say. I am falling in love with you too, Eliza whispered. I have been fighting it because it feels too soon, because I still love Thomas and always will. But you are right, the heart can hold more than one person. Thomas would want me to be happy. He would want his son to have a father. And Jacob, you have been more than I could have hoped for. You are kind and strong and gentle and everything good. Eliza. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I am still frightened, she admitted. Frightened of moving too fast, of dishonoring Thomas's memory, of what people might think. There are no people here, Jacob said, echoing her own thoughts. Just you, me, and the baby. We make our own rules. Then here is my rule, Eliza said, squeezing his hands. We take this slow. We let our feelings grow naturally. And when the time is right, when we are both ready, we see where this leads. Can you live with that? I can live with anything as long as I am with you, Jacob said. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss that was both chaste and full of promise. Eliza closed her eyes, letting herself feel the warmth of him, the rightness of this moment. It was not what she had expected when the blizzard struck, but life rarely followed expected paths. Sometimes, she thought, the best things came from the most unlikely circumstances. The winter deepened, and so did their connection. They still slept in separate rooms, still maintained a careful physical distance, but the emotional intimacy between them grew with each passing day. Jacob told her about his dreams, how he wanted to expand his cabin, maybe start a small ranch eventually, raise horses or cattle. Eliza shared her own aspirations to give Thomas a good education, to build a real home in this wild country, to maybe one day open a seamstress shop in town where she could use her skills. We could do all of that, Jacob said one evening. Together, we could build something real here. Are you proposing? Eliza asked, half teasing, half serious. Not yet, Jacob said, a smile playing at his lips. When I propose, you will know it. It will be proper and romantic, the way you deserve. I do not need proper and romantic, Eliza said. I just need real. You will get both, Jacob promised. In February, Jacob took Eliza out to check the trap lines, with baby Thomas bundled against her chest in a sling Jacob had fashioned from deerskin. It was Eliza's first real excursion beyond the cabin since the birth, and she was amazed by the winter landscape, the way the snow sparkled like diamonds, the way the bare trees reached toward the pale sky, the way tracks crisscrossed the white surface telling stories of animal activity. Jacob taught her to read these tracks, showing her the difference between deer and elk, between fox and wolf. He taught her which plants could be harvested even in winter, which trees could be tapped for syrup. He was a patient teacher, and she was an eager student, absorbing everything he shared. You are a natural at this, he said, watching her successfully set a snare. In a few more months you will not need me at all. I will always need you, Eliza said before she could stop herself, then blushed at her own boldness. Jacob's face softened. Good, because I plan on being around for a very long time. They returned to the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Jacob built up the fire while Eliza nursed the baby, and they ate dinner together, talking about the day. It felt so natural, so right, this little family they were building. Thomas would be turning 2 months old soon, and he was already changing, becoming more responsive, starting to smile at Jacob's silly faces. He likes you, Eliza observed, watching her son gurgle happily in Jacob's massive hands. I like him too, Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I would have this a family, even an unconventional one. After the war, I believed I was too damaged to deserve it. We are all damaged in some way, Eliza said softly, but that does not mean we do not deserve love and happiness. When did you get so wise? Jacob asked, smiling at her. I learned from a very wise mountain man, she replied. As March arrived, the weather began to shift. The days grew longer, the sun warmer. Snow started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Eliza knew that spring would come eventually, and with it, decisions would need to be made about the future. But she tried not to think too far ahead, focusing instead on each day as it came. One afternoon, Jacob returned from hunting with a deer slung over his shoulders. He was grinning, and Eliza realized she had never seen him look so happy. "We will eat well for the next few weeks," he announced, lowering the deer to the ground, "and the hide will make good leather." "You're pleased with yourself," Eliza said, amused. "I am pleased with life," Jacob corrected. He crossed to where she sat mending by the window and pulled her to her feet. "Dance with me." "Dance? There is no music." "We will make our own." And he began to hum a waltz, something slow and sweet as he guided her around the small cabin floor. Eliza laughed, letting him lead, her hand in his other hand resting properly at her waist. They moved together, and it felt like flying. When the humming stopped, they stood still, breathing hard, faces close together. Eliza could see every detail of Jacob's face, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the flecks of silver beginning to show in his beard, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She reached up without thinking and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his skin. "Eliza," he breathed. "Kiss me," she whispered. "Please." Jacob needed no further invitation. He lowered his head and captured her lips with his, and Eliza felt the world tilt. The kiss was everything gentle but passionate, respectful but hungry. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his embrace. It had been so long since she had been held like this, since she had felt desire and love intertwined. With Thomas, it had been sweet and safe. With Jacob, it was fire and storm, and coming home all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Eliza replied, and saying it aloud made it real in a way that thinking it had not. "I love you, Jacob Thorne, and I do not want to fight it any more." "Then do not," he said. "Let us just be happy. Let us build this life together." "Yes," Eliza agreed, "yes to all of it." They kissed again, longer this time, exploring and discovering each other. When baby Thomas started fussing in his cradle, they broke apart with reluctant smiles, but the promise hung in the air between them. This was just the beginning. That night, after the baby was asleep, they sat together on the bed, holding hands and talking about the future in concrete terms. Jacob wanted to marry her properly, wanted to adopt Thomas as his own son, wanted to give them his name and his protection officially. Eliza agreed to all of it, her heart full to bursting. "When?" she asked. "We could go into town when the pass is clear in another month," Jacob suggested. "Find a preacher, make it legal." "And then?" "Then we decide where to live, my cabin or this one, or we build something new, whatever you want." "I want to start fresh," Eliza said. "Take the best of both places and create our own home, somewhere with room to grow." "For more children?" Jacob asked carefully. Eliza felt a thrill at the thought. "Would you want that? More children?" "If you are willing," Jacob said. "I want a house full of them. I want noise and chaos and life. I want everything I thought I had given up." "Then that is what we will have," Eliza promised. They sealed the promise with another kiss, and this time when Jacob made to pull away, Eliza held him close. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay with me tonight. I do not want to be apart anymore." "Are you sure?" Jacob asked, searching her face. "I do not want to rush you." "I'm sure. I want this. I want you." They came together with a tenderness that brought tears to Eliza's eyes. Jacob was careful with her, mindful of her body still recovering, focused entirely on her pleasure and comfort. It was different than it had been with Thomas, not better or worse, just different. And Eliza let herself enjoy the difference, the newness, the way Jacob's powerful body felt against hers, the way his hands knew exactly how to touch her, the way he whispered her name like a benediction. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin to skin, and Eliza felt more at peace than she had in months. Jacob's arms were wrapped around her, his large hand splayed across her belly, and she covered it with her own. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For stumbling into my life, for delivering my baby, for staying, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Jacob replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for giving me a reason to come down from the mountain." They fell asleep like that, and when baby Thomas woke, crying in the early morning hours, Jacob was the one who got up, who changed his diaper and brought him to Eliza to nurse, who sang a soft, off-key lullaby until the baby fell back asleep. Watching him, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This was her future. This was her family. Spring came slowly to Montana, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted in earnest, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The creek behind the cabin swelled with runoff, rushing and tumbling over rocks. Birds returned, filling the air with song. And Eliza felt herself blooming alongside the landscape, coming back to life after a long, dark winter. In April, when the mountain passes were clear enough for travel, Jacob saddled his horse and helped Eliza and the baby onto the back. They rode into town, a rough settlement called Silver Creek, about 20 miles from the cabin, and found the local preacher, a weather-beaten man named Reverend Walsh, who asked no uncomfortable questions about timing or propriety. He married them in his small church, with his wife and a few curious townspeople as witnesses. Eliza wore her best dress, cleaned and mended to respectability. Jacob had trimmed his beard and pulled his hair back, looking almost civilized despite his size and wild nature. When he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, purchased from the town's only jeweler, Eliza felt tears of joy stream down her face. "I pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Walsh intoned. "You may kiss your bride." And Jacob did, thoroughly and sweetly, while the small congregation applauded. They were officially Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Thorne now, with baby Thomas legally adopted as Jacob's son. It was a new beginning, a new family, forged from loss and storms and unexpected miracles. They stayed in town for 2 days, buying supplies and letting people get used to the idea of the widow Bennett's remarriage. There was some gossip, as Eliza had expected, but most people seemed to understand the practical necessity of her situation. A woman alone with a baby in the wilderness, of course, she would need a husband. That Jacob was clearly a good provider and obviously devoted to her, helped smooth things over. On the ride back to the cabin, Eliza leaned against Jacob's broad back, feeling his warmth through his shirt, listening to the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Thomas slept in the sling against her chest, lulled by the movement. Everything felt right with the world. "Happy?" Jacob asked over his shoulder. "Deliriously," Eliza replied. "Good, because I plan to keep you that way for the next 50 years at least." "Only 50?" Eliza teased. "Well, I'm considerably older than you. I'm trying to be realistic." "Do not be. I prefer romantic over realistic anyway." Jacob laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Romantic it is, then." They spent the summer transforming their life. Jacob decided his mountain cabin was too remote for raising a family, so they focused on improving Thomas's original cabin, adding a room for privacy, reinforcing the walls, building proper furniture. Jacob was skilled with his hands, and everything he built was solid and beautiful. Eliza planted a garden, growing vegetables that would help sustain them through the next winter. She sewed curtains and made the cabin feel like a true home. Baby Thomas thrived in the mountain air, growing chubby and strong. He learned to sit up, then crawl, his personality emerging more each day. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he adored Jacob, reaching for him whenever the big man came near. Watching them together never failed to make Eliza's heart swell. Jacob was a natural father, patient and playful, and Thomas responded to him with pure love. In August, Eliza realized she was pregnant again. At first, she was surprised she and Jacob had been careful, or so she thought, but as the reality sank in, she found she was thrilled. A new baby, a child that would be part of both of them, seemed like the perfect way to cement their new family. She told Jacob one evening after Thomas was asleep. She simply took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We are having another baby," she said softly. Jacob's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. "Truly?" "Truly." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and she felt his tears fall into her hair. "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice breaking. "A wife who loves me, a son who is mine in all the ways that matter, and now another child. Eliza, you have given me everything." "You have given me just as much," Eliza replied, her own tears flowing freely. "You gave me hope when I thought I had none. You gave me and Thomas a future. You gave me love when I needed it most." They held each other as the sun set outside the cabin windows, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Somewhere in the trees, a wolf howled and Jacob smiled against her hair. "That is probably my old friend from the mountains," he said. The pack sometimes comes this far down. I should introduce you properly sometime." "You and your wolves," Eliza said fondly. "I married a wild man." "You did indeed. Having regrets?" "Not a single one." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and this time, Eliza was not afraid. She had Jacob beside her, and she knew he would see her through whatever challenges arose. He was attentive to her needs, making sure she rested, taking over more of the physical work around the cabin. Young Thomas was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs, getting into everything with the determined curiosity of a 1-year-old. Jacob built him toys and carved animals, spent hours on the floor playing with the boy who called him Papa in his baby babble. Winter came again, but this time it held no terror for Eliza. They were prepared, well stocked with food and supplies, and they had each other. Snow fell and the temperature dropped, but inside the cabin there was warmth and laughter and love. Jacob told stories by the fire, teaching Thomas his letters even though the boy was too young to really understand. Eliza sewed baby clothes, preparing for the new arrival due in March. "I hope it is a girl this time," Jacob said one evening, watching her work. "A daughter with your red hair and your green eyes." "And what if it is another boy?" Eliza asked, amused. "Then he will have a brother to grow up with, and we will try again for a girl." "How many children are you planning on, Mr. Thorne?" "As many as you are willing to give me, Mrs. Thorne." The baby came on a cold March morning, almost exactly a year after Thomas had been born. This time, the labor was shorter, and there was no blizzard, just a quiet snowfall that blanketed the world in peace. Jacob was there every moment, holding Eliza's hand, encouraging her, and when their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry, he wept openly. "A girl," he breathed, taking the tiny bundle from Eliza. "We have a daughter." They named her Catherine, after Eliza's mother, with the middle name Hope. Catherine Hope Thorne, born into love and safety, her father's pride evident in every look he gave her. Young Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly under careful supervision. The cabin that had once housed only grief and fear now rang with life and joy. Spring turned to summer, and the Thorne family flourished. Jacob taught Thomas to fish in the creek, the little boy's laughter echoing through the mountains. Eliza worked her garden, baby Catherine strapped to her back. They had become part of the landscape, as natural as the trees and rocks, building a life that was entirely their own. Some evenings, after the children were asleep, Jacob and Eliza would sit outside and watch the stars. Jacob would wrap a blanket around them both, and they would talk about their days, their dreams, all the little details that made up a life together. "Do you ever miss your solitary life in the mountains?" Eliza asked once. Jacob pulled her closer. "Not for a single second. That life was about hiding from the world, from myself. This life is about embracing everything beautiful that exists. You taught me that, Eliza. You taught me that I could come down from the mountain and still find peace, maybe more peace than I ever had up there." "You saved my life," Eliza said. "That night in the blizzard, if you had not knocked on my door." "But I did," Jacob interrupted gently. "The storm brought me to you, and I choose to believe that was meant to be. Everything that happened, Thomas dying, you being alone, the blizzard, all of it was terrible, but it led us to each other. I cannot regret the path that brought me to you." "I cannot either," Eliza agreed. She turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Jacob Thorne. I love our life. I love everything we have built together. And I love you, Eliza Thorne, more than I have words to express." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains, and Eliza reflected on how much had changed in 2 years. She had gone from being a terrified widow about to give birth in a blizzard to being a wife and mother, secure in love and partnership. Thomas, both her son and her late husband, had legacies that lived on. Her boy was growing strong and curious, full of life, and her marriage to Jacob honored what she had shared with her first husband while creating something entirely new. The years rolled on in their mountain cabin. Jacob's past as a soldier faded further into memory, replaced by the daily realities of farming and hunting and raising children. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's quick mind and his adopted father's love of the outdoors. Catherine became a wild, fearless little girl who followed her father everywhere. And in time, there were more children, twin boys, born when Thomas was 5, another daughter 2 years later. The cabin was expanded multiple times to accommodate the growing family. Jacob built a proper barn for the horses and chickens they acquired. Eliza's garden grew each year, providing vegetables that she sold in town, along with the furs and meat Jacob trapped. They became known in Silver Creek as a solid, respectable family. And the gossip about Eliza's quick remarriage eventually faded into forgotten history. On their 10th anniversary, Jacob surprised Eliza with a piece of paper, the deed to the land they lived on, which he had legally filed and paid for. 200 acres of Montana mountain country, theirs forever. For our family, he said, presenting it to her. For our children and their children. We have put roots down here, Eliza. This is our legacy. Eliza cried as she hugged him, overwhelmed by the permanence of it all. They had survived so much grief, storms, hardship, the challenges of frontier life. And through it all, their love had only deepened, growing stronger and more resilient with each passing year. Thomas, the oldest, grew into a young man who remembered his birth father in stories, but knew Jacob as his true papa. He had no memory of the blizzard that had brought Jacob into their lives, but he grew up hearing the tale, understanding that his family was born from survival and love in equal measure. He watched his parents with the clear eyes of a child who had never known anything but devotion between his mother and father, and he internalized those lessons about what partnership should look like. Catherine became a force of nature, tough as nails and gentle as a lamb depending on the situation. She learned to shoot and ride from Jacob, to sew and garden from Eliza. She declared she would never marry and leave the mountains, though Eliza suspected that would change when the right person came along. The younger children, the twin boys Samuel and Daniel, and little Mary filled the cabin with constant noise and motion, and Jacob thrived in the chaos, patient even when patience should have run out. Some nights, when the house was particularly loud, Jacob would catch Eliza's eye across the dinner table and smile, and she would know exactly what he was thinking. We built this beautiful, messy, loud, perfect life. We built it together. On the 15th anniversary of the night Jacob knocked on her door during the blizzard, Eliza insisted they celebrate. The children were old enough to be left with Thomas, who at 17 was more than capable of managing his siblings for an evening. Jacob and Eliza bundled up and walked through the snow to the spot where they had first met, where the door to the cabin had opened on the worst and best night of both their lives. The cabin had been expanded so much that the original door was now part of an interior wall, but they stood in that space, remembering. 15 years, Eliza said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. You opened that door and changed my life, Jacob said. He looked older now, silver threading through his dark hair and beard, lines carved deeper around his eyes. But he was still strong, still powerful, still the mountain man who had delivered her baby and stolen her heart. I was half frozen and completely lost, and you let me in. You delivered my baby, Eliza countered. You stayed when any sensible person would have left. You loved me when I was too broken to think I could love again. I would do it all over, Jacob said fiercely. Every moment, every hardship, every challenge. I would walk through 1,000 blizzards to find my way to you. They kissed there in the snow, husband and wife, their love tested by time and proven strong. Around them, the mountains stood silent witness, the same peaks that had sheltered them through that first terrible, wonderful night when a widow in labor and a wandering mountain man had found salvation in each other. Back at the house, their children waited 5 living proof of everything they had built. And though Eliza sometimes thought of Thomas, her first husband, with fond remembrance, her heart belonged fully to Jacob now. There was no division, no conflict. She had loved Thomas with the sweet, hopeful love of youth. She loved Jacob with the deep, abiding love of partnership, forged in the hardest of circumstances. "Take me home," she said to her husband, and Jacob smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "We are home," he replied. "We have been home since the moment we found each other." They walked back through the snow, smoke rising from the cabin chimney, light glowing in the windows, the sound of children's laughter spilling into the cold night air. Eliza looked up at Jacob, at his strong profile silhouetted against the stars, and felt nothing but gratitude for the blizzard that had brought him to her door, for the courage it had taken for both of them to open their hearts again, for every day they had been given together. Life in the Montana mountains was never easy. There were hard winters and failed crops, sickness and accidents, all the trials that came with frontier living. But the Thorne family faced everything together, bound by love that had been tested in the fire of suffering and proven unbreakable. Jacob remained Eliza's rock, steady and strong, always there when she needed him. And she was his light, pulling him fully into the world of the living, proving that love could heal even the deepest wounds. As the years continued to pass, they grew old together in the best possible way, slowly, surrounded by family, with no regrets and countless memories. Thomas married a girl from town and built his own cabin on the property, raising Eliza's grandchildren within sight of her kitchen window. Catherine eventually did fall in love with a young rancher who was brave enough to handle her fierce spirit. The younger children grew and found their own paths, some staying close, some venturing out into the wider world, but all carrying with them the lessons of resilience and love their parents had embodied. Jacob lived to see his grandchildren grow, to teach them the same wilderness skills he had taught his own children. He remained strong well into his 60s, still hunting and trapping, though he moved a bit slower and let young Thomas take over more of the heavy work. His hair went fully silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes remained that same storm cloud gray that had first captivated Eliza. On their 30th anniversary, weak with age but surrounded by love, Jacob sat in the chair by the fire, the same chair he had sat in that first night, and pulled Eliza onto his lap as if she weighed nothing. Their children and grandchildren filled the cabin, 3 generations of Thornes, and Jacob looked at all of it with wonder. "Thank you," he said to Eliza, his voice still strong despite the years. "Thank you for opening the door. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this life." "Thank you for knocking," Eliza replied, tears streaming down her aged face. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving all of us so well." They held each other while the family celebrated around them, and Eliza thought back to that terrified girl laboring alone during a blizzard. She had been so certain she would die, that her baby would die, that the world was a dark and hopeless place. But then a mountain man had appeared out of the storm, and everything had changed. Jacob lived another 5 years, active and engaged right up until the end. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at 68, with Eliza holding his hand, the entire territory seemed to mourn. He had become a legend in Silver Creek, the mountain man who had built an empire of love, who had raised children that were not biologically his as if they were his own blood, who had loved his wife with a devotion that inspired everyone who saw them together. Eliza lived another decade after that, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling and retelling the story of the blizzard, of the birth, of the mountain man who had stumbled through her door and changed everything. She never remarried, never even considered it. Jacob had been her soulmate, her partner, her great love, and she was content to honor his memory by continuing to build the legacy they had started together. When she finally passed at 76, she was buried next to Jacob on the hill behind the cabin, the same hill where Thomas Bennett had been buried so many years before. 3 graves marking 3 lives that had intertwined in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. The cabin still stood, now home to Thomas and his growing family, and it would stand for generations more, a testament to what could be built when courage met circumstance, when grief met hope, when a blizzard brought 2 lonely souls together and gave them everything they had ever needed. The story of the pregnant widow who went into labor during the blizzard and the mountain man who delivered the child safely became family lore, passed down through generations. It was told at weddings and births, during storms when the family gathered close, any time someone needed reminding that even in the darkest moments, salvation could appear in the most unlikely forms. It was a story of survival and love, of second chances and chosen family, of how the heart was capable of healing and opening even after the most devastating losses. And in the mountains of Montana, where the wind still howled through the passes and snow still fell deep in winter, the legacy of Eliza and Jacob Thorne lived on in the lives they had touched, the family they had built, and the love they had proven was possible even in the harshest of circumstances. Their story was proof that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best outcomes, that opening a door to a stranger could mean opening a door to an entire future, and that love, real, true, abiding love, could grow even in the coldest, most unforgiving of environments, blooming like a wildflower through snow, beautiful and fierce and impossible to kill. The end of their individual stories marked the beginning of a legacy that would stretch across time. The Thorne family prospered on that mountain land for generations, each new member hearing the tale of their ancestors, understanding that they existed because a widow had been brave enough to open her door during a blizzard, and a mountain man had been brave enough to knock. It was a story of survival, yes, but more than that, it was a story of love conquering fear, of hope emerging from despair, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. And that story, like the mountains themselves, was eternal.